In our last video, we ended right here talking about the election of 1800, which saw a shift in political parties. We moved from Federalist Adams being in office to Democratic Republican Jefferson being elected as president. And we also see, as a result of this election, the passage of the 12th Amendment that makes the president and the vice president be selected on separate ballots. Let's talk a little bit about Jefferson. So Jefferson favored a reduced role of the federal government. And so when he takes office, he's going to reverse many Federalist policies, including the Naturalization Act and excise taxes, which are taxes on goods produced within the country. He believed that the government should be frugal with its funds, and he therefore reduced military and other governmental expenditures and made large payments on the national debt. So he thought that we shouldn't have national debt, and that we should reduce the size of government and not spending all this money supporting a very large central government. So Jefferson's going to manage to gain support for his policies in Congress. This is particularly because of the Federalist Party's weakened state. However, he did make some concessions to the Federalists in order to gain Hamilton's support in the contested election of 1800. He therefore is going to retain the National Bank and the tariffs that the Federalists had put into place. Even though he fundamentally disagrees with the National Bank, he allows it to exist. One of the controversies that kind of mars Jefferson's first term is this. And so, in accordance with the Judiciary Act of 1801, which was passed immediately before Adams left office, Adams makes over 200 last-minute appointments of judges to federal district courts. These are dubbed the midnight judges because they were appointed all the way up into the midnight hour. So Jefferson sees these judges' positions as illegitimate, and he successfully pressures Congress to repeal the Judiciary Act of 1801, and then he nullified these midnight appointments. So one judge that was appointed in this manner, William Marbury, petitions to become a federal judge anyway. So he says, I didn't get my appointment. Adams wanted to put me there. I should be there. And so he sues all the way up to the Supreme Court in order to get there. This becomes known as the famous Supreme Court case, Marbury versus Madison. You see the name up here, and this date in parentheses tells you the year that that is going to be decided. And this is where Chief Justice John Marshall is going to rule that Secretary of State James Madison does not have to make Marbury a judge because of the part of the Judiciary Act of 1789 that compels Madison to do so is unconstitutional. So Marbury versus Madison is going to be particularly famous for being the first case in which the Supreme Court establishes its role of judicial review. This is an extremely important concept. This gives legitimacy to everything that the Supreme Court is going to do from this point forward. Why does the court have the right to review any law in the books and declare that law unconstitutional? Because of this court case. So it sets precedent for the Supreme Court to decide in all subsequent cases. So judicial review is the practice in which the Supreme Court may determine the law by overruling or upholding acts of Congress or the president. So in this case, Marshall declared a part of an act of Congress, the Judiciary Act of 1789, unconstitutional, thus overruling the act. So Marbury versus Madison from 1803 establishes this idea of judicial review. Next, we get the Louisiana Purchase. So by 1801, the country had grown to include territory west of the Mississippi River, north along the shores of the Great Lakes, and south to the 31st parallel bordering Spanish Florida. A great deal of trade occurred along the Mississippi River, which ends at New Orleans, at the mouth of the Mississippi. And with Spain in control of New Orleans, American merchants sometimes had difficulty getting their goods all the way down the river. So as interest grows in gaining this territory for the U.S., we're going to look at how can we purchase this. Well, in 1800, Spain had ceded this Louisiana territory to France in a secret treaty. So this vast region included New Orleans, but it also extended northwest to the Rocky Mountains. And the British had concerns about this transfer, fearing that our enemy, Napoleon Bonaparte, would gain control of trade in the Western territories. So Britain also worried that Spain might also give Florida to France, and so Secretary of State James Madison began discussions with Britain on this subject. Jefferson sent Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, his close friend, who had relocated from France in 1799, to warn the French government about a U.S.-British alliance against France if France took over Louisiana. Dupont, meanwhile, suggested that the U.S. buy Florida to show Napoleon that the U.S. could act toward its own interests. And so we have some diplomacy going on there. Well, we know from history that we do get the Louisiana Purchase. And so as negotiations drag on, Jefferson sends James Monroe to France to speak with the French government. He advised Congress to offer close to $1 million for Florida and New Orleans alone. So, wary of an alliance between Britain and the U.S. and unwilling to shoulder the cost of running the territory while going to war with most of Europe, Napoleon decides to offer in the entire Louisiana territory for sale to the U.S. The U.S. is going to agree and sign a treaty on April 30th, 1803 to pay what is today about $15 million for this enormous spread of land. The U.S. territory instantly doubles in size. The Louisiana Purchase is going to be controversial because the Constitution does not specifically allow the federal government to purchase new land. Federalists are going to oppose the purchase and deem it unconstitutional and too expensive. Jefferson argues, however, that this transaction should stand, and since the U.S. had purchased Louisiana in a treaty, which the Constitution does permit, privately, Jefferson had really big concerns about running up the national debt and the constitutionality of buying Louisiana. Like, did the Constitution even give him this power? But in the end, he's going to find it just too good of a deal to pass up. And we call this the land deal of the century, okay? We get all of this territory for less than 3 cents per acre. What a steal. But once we purchase this territory, we have to figure out what's there. And this is where these two guys come in, if you've heard of before, Lewis and Clark. Jefferson had already planned to send an expedition to explore the far western region of the continent, and so when he purchases Louisiana in 1803, it just gives him more incentive to do so. Jefferson wants to find that fabled Northwest Passage that would serve as a trade route between the Missouri River and the Pacific Ocean. He also has a very strong interest in science, and you'll see this in one of the readings that we're going to do, and was curious about the lands to the west. So he sends Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead the corps of discovery on this exploratory mission. Lewis, Clark, and 31 other men are going to leave Missouri in 1803, and during the next 2 years, they're going to make the round trip to the headwaters of the Missouri River, over the Bitterroot Mountains and into present-day Montana and Idaho, along the Snake and Columbia Rivers, and all the way to the Pacific. Along the way, they're going to pass through numerous Native American settlements, and they're going to ask for assistance for some of their residents. Well, these individuals include a lady by the name of Sacagawea, however you want to say her name. Lewis and Clark get help. She was a teenage Shoshone woman who had followed the expedition to the Pacific with her husband, a French fur trapper. So Sacagawea and other Native Americans help arrange contacts with whom the expedition could trade for supplies that they're going to need to get all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back. This includes horses to carry their gear over the mountains, and the party also encounters some very hostile Native American tribes, such as the Blackfeet, who are not going to welcome these white visitors to their land. And although the Lewis and Clark expedition isn't going to locate the Northwest Passage, the people that took this expedition are going to succeed in gathering a wealth of information about the continent's animals, plants, people, and terrain. And these expedition journals are going to be published in part in 1814 and in their entirety in 1905, and they will detail these observations of what Lewis and Clark found and saw in their years of exploration. So as a result of this Lewis and Clark expedition, the U.S. claims Oregon country for itself. Great Britain and Russia also have claim to this area. It's now commonly referred to as the Pacific Northwest, but Russia's going to give up claims to the Oregon country in 1824, and the Oregon Treaty of 1846 is going to end the dispute between the U.S. and Britain. This treaty established the present-day boundaries between western U.S. and Canada at the 49th parallel. The part of the Oregon country that remained in the U.S. became Oregon Territory, and the expedition also led to an increase in the western fur trade, diplomatic relations between the U.S. government and Native American tribes, and increases public enthusiasm for and interest in the West. I want to look at some discussion questions from this and from the previous video. If you'll answer these in your notes, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. We have 3 today. Number 1, why did the Federalists pass the Alien and Sedition Acts? Number 2, what spurred Jefferson to begin negotiations for the Louisiana Purchase? And number 3, how did Marbury versus Madison clarify the relationship between branches of the federal government? If you'll write those down in your notes, we have a couple more videos to get through this era in history, and then we will make sure we wrap it up and answer any questions before your debate. If you have any questions about these or anything that I've said, please feel free to email me or ask me in class. I will check these notes for you tomorrow. Have a great evening.